I stared at the invitation in my trembling hands, the gold embossing catching the afternoon light streaming through our modest farmhouse window. Mrs. Rebecca Chen, you are cordially invited to attend the Presidential Medal of Honor ceremony honoring General Marcus Chen for his extraordinary service to our nation. My husband of 3 years looked up from his ledger where he'd been calculating seed costs, dirt still under his fingernails from the morning harvest, completely unaware that in 2 weeks, the President of the United States would be pinning the highest military honor on his chest. The laughter still echoed in my memory from our wedding day. My sister Victoria had actually snorted champagne through her nose when I announced my engagement to Marcus. A farmer, Rebecca? Really? After everything we invested in your education? My mother had been more direct, her voice dripping with disappointment as she gestured at my Harvard MBA diploma hanging on her wall. We spent $200,000 on your education so you could marry someone who grows vegetables for a living? But they didn't know what I knew. They hadn't seen the medals hidden in Marcus's old army duffel bag, hadn't noticed how he still woke at 0500 every morning, hadn't caught the way his eyes tracked every exit when we entered a room. They saw dirt under his fingernails and overalls and assumed that was all there was to see. The abuse had been subtle but relentless throughout my childhood, never quite crossing the line into anything actionable, but always there. The constant comparisons to Victoria, the conditional love that evaporated whenever I failed to meet their impossible standards. My parents, Dr. Eleanor Hartwell and Judge William Hartwell, had raised us like prize show dogs competing for scraps of their approval. Victoria, 2 years older and blessed with their genetic gift for ruthless ambition, had always won. When I was 8, I'd overheard my mother telling her bridge club that I was the disappointing one, while Victoria was destined for greatness. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, they barely acknowledged it because Victoria had gotten into Yale Law while I'd only managed Harvard Business. When I landed a six-figure consulting job straight out of graduate school, they dismissed it because Victoria was already making partner track at a white shoe law firm. The final blow came when I met Marcus at a farmer's market 2 years ago. He was selling organic heirloom tomatoes, his broad shoulders filling out a simple blue work shirt, his smile genuine in a way I'd never encountered in my corporate circles. We talked for an hour about soil composition and sustainable farming practices, and I found myself more intellectually stimulated than I'd been in years of boardroom meetings. But when I brought him to meet my family 6 months later, their reaction was swift and brutal. My father actually laughed out loud when Marcus mentioned he owned a small organic farm. My mother made a point of serving him dinner on our second-best china, a subtle but unmistakable insult. Victoria spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about people who work with their hands and questioning whether Marcus even had health insurance. The night I announced our engagement, my mother delivered her ultimatum with surgical precision. If you marry this man, don't expect any financial support from us, and don't expect to be included in family functions where our reputation might be compromised. My father had been more direct. I won't have a farmer at my table. Choose carefully, Rebecca. This decision will define the rest of your life. They'd cut me off completely after the wedding. No Christmas invitations, no birthday calls, no acknowledgement of my existence. Victoria had made sure to post photos from every family gathering on social media, making sure I could see exactly what I was missing. They'd even excluded me from my grandfather's funeral last year, claiming there wasn't enough room in the car. But as I held that invitation, everything crystallized. The years of Marcus waking from nightmares he wouldn't discuss, the way he'd trained our farm dogs with military precision, the perfect way he could field strip and clean a rifle when our chicken coop was threatened by foxes, the mysterious quarterly payments that appeared in our account, which he'd always explained away as consulting work, the fact that he spoke 4 languages fluently and could identify the make and model of any helicopter by its sound alone. I thought back to our first Christmas together when I'd asked him about the scar that ran from his left shoulder to his elbow. He'd been quiet for a long moment before saying, Afghanistan. I was leading a convoy when we hit an IED. Lost 3 good men that day. But then he'd changed the subject, deflecting my questions with talk of spring planting schedules. What I hadn't known, what none of them had known, was that my poor farmer husband was Marcus Chen, the Marcus Chen, the legendary Special Forces commander who'd led the most successful counterterrorism operations in modern military history. The man who'd spent 15 years in the Army's most elite units, earning a chest full of medals including 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, and now, apparently, the Medal of Honor. The ceremony was classified information until now, but the invitation explained everything. Marcus had been undercover for the past 5 years, living quietly on our farm while the military investigated a massive intelligence leak that had compromised several of his former operations. The investigation was finally complete, the traitors identified and arrested, and Marcus was being honored for not only his years of heroic service, but for his sacrifice in giving up his identity to protect national security. As I sat there processing this information, Marcus walked in from the fields, his boots muddy, his face honest and weathered. He saw me holding the invitation and his expression shifted subtly. Less farmer, more commanding officer. "I guess it's time," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from me. "I wanted to tell you, Rebecca. Every day for 3 years, I wanted to tell you who I really was. But I couldn't risk it. Too many good people died because of those intelligence leaks." "How long?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "I retired from active duty 5 years ago, right after my last deployment went bad. Lost my entire team to a leak from someone high up in the Pentagon. The Army asked me to disappear while they investigated, to stay off the grid completely. I'd always dreamed of farming. It was what kept me sane during the worst deployments. So I bought this land with my savings and tried to build a normal life." He reached across the table and took my hands in his calloused ones. "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca. You saw something in me that had nothing to do with my rank or my medals. You loved me when I was just a guy growing tomatoes." The wheels in my mind were already turning. My family had humiliated me, cut me off, treated Marcus like dirt beneath their feet. They'd made their judgment based on assumptions and appearances, never bothering to look deeper. They had no idea that the man they dismissed so cruelly was about to be honored at the White House, that major news networks were preparing feature stories about his heroic service, that he was quite literally one of the most decorated soldiers of his generation. "The ceremony is in 2 weeks," I said slowly. "It's going to be televised, isn't it?" Marcus nodded. "Full media coverage. The president specifically requested that. He wants the public to know about the sacrifices made to protect those intelligence operations." I smiled for the first time in days. I think it's time my family learned exactly who I married. The plan formed with crystalline clarity. I would attend that ceremony, and I would make sure my family witnessed every moment of it. Not by inviting them, they'd forfeited that right long ago, but by ensuring they couldn't possibly miss it. First, I called the local newspaper, the one my mother read religiously. I identified myself as Marcus Chen's wife and offered them an exclusive local angle on the Medal of Honor story. "War hero returns home to local farm," would be their headline, complete with photos of our property and interviews with neighbors who'd known Marcus as a quiet, hardworking farmer. Next, I reached out to my old contacts from Harvard Business School. Several of them now worked in media, and I pitched them a human interest story about the hidden heroes among us. Decorated soldiers living quietly in small communities across America. I made sure to mention that my husband would be featured in the ceremony and that we'd been ostracized by my wealthy family for his chosen profession. Then came the masterstroke. I knew my parents' social calendar better than they did. Every charity gala, every country club function, every opportunity they had to display their status. The biggest event of the year was the annual Hartwell Foundation dinner, a black tie affair they hosted every December to celebrate my father's judicial career. It was always held on a Saturday night, always drew the most influential people in our city, and always featured a large screen presentation highlighting the foundation's achievements. This year's dinner was scheduled for the same week as Marcus's ceremony. I made a call to my father's assistant, identifying myself as a representative from the local PBS affiliate. "We wanted to honor a local hero at the Hartwell Foundation dinner," I explained. "Would they be willing to broadcast the Medal of Honor ceremony as part of their evening's program? It would be such wonderful publicity for their foundation, showing how their community was home to America's finest." The assistant was thrilled. Judge Hartwell would be so pleased to honor a local veteran at their event. They'd arranged for the broadcast to be shown on the main screens during dinner with the full guest list watching. But I wasn't done. Victoria's law firm specialized in military contracts, and I knew she'd been trying to land a major Defense Department account for months. I had Marcus help me draft a letter to the Pentagon's legal liaison office, suggesting they might want to attend the ceremony to meet some of the area's top military contractors. I made sure to mention Victoria's firm specifically, knowing that someone from her office would definitely be present. The ceremony itself was more magnificent than I could have imagined. The White House East Room was filled with dignitaries, politicians, and military brass. Marcus looked impossibly handsome in his dress uniform, his chest covered with ribbons and medals I'd never seen before. When the president began reading his citation, the room fell completely silent. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen led a rescue mission behind enemy lines to save 12 wounded soldiers trapped by insurgent forces. Despite being severely wounded himself, Staff Sergeant Chen single-handedly held off a larger enemy force for over 6 hours, allowing all 12 soldiers to be evacuated safely. The citation went on for 10 minutes, detailing acts of heroism that sounded like something from a movie. Marcus had saved literally dozens of lives over his career, had been wounded in action multiple times, and had volunteered for the most dangerous missions repeatedly. As the president placed the medal around his neck, I saw tears in the eyes of hardened generals. But the real victory was happening 300 miles away, in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club. I'd arranged for our local PBS affiliate to provide live commentary during the broadcast, and their reporter had done his homework. As the ceremony played on the massive screens throughout the ballroom, the narrator provided background on Marcus's connection to our community. General Chen, recently promoted in recognition of his extraordinary service, has been living quietly in our area for the past 5 years, working as an organic farmer with his wife, Rebecca. Neighbors describe him as a humble, hardworking man who never spoke of his military service. I could imagine the scene perfectly. My parents, dressed in their finest formal wear, sitting at their head tables surrounded by the city's elite. My mother, who'd spent years telling people how disappointed she was in my choice of husband. My father, who'd refused to attend my wedding because he was embarrassed to have a farmer in the family. Victoria, who'd made countless jokes about my husband's dirty fingernails and blue-collar profession. The camera panned to me sitting in the front row of the White House ceremony, wearing a stunning navy blue gown that had cost more than most people's cars. The reporter noted that I was a Harvard MBA who'd given up a lucrative consulting career to support my husband's transition to civilian life. Then came the interview footage they'd shot at our farm the week before. Marcus, still in his work clothes, but with his military bearing now evident to anyone who knew what to look for, explaining how farming had helped him heal from the psychological wounds of war. Me standing beside him with obvious pride and love, talking about how honored I was to be married to such an extraordinary man. The camera showed our property, not the rundown farm my family had imagined, but a thriving, beautiful operation with state-of-the-art facilities and sustainable practices that were being studied by agricultural universities. Our farmhouse, which they'd assumed was a hovel, was revealed to be a gorgeous restored 19th century home filled with antiques and artwork. But the killing blow came when the reporter mentioned the farm's annual revenue. Marcus's organic operation wasn't just successful, it was wildly profitable, earning more per acre than most traditional farms earned per square mile. Combined with his military pension and the consulting work he'd been doing for the Department of Agriculture, our household income was well into 6 figures. The ceremony concluded with Marcus and me walking out of the White House together, his arm around my waist, both of us radiating happiness and success. The reporter noted that we'd be returning to our farm, where General Chen would continue his work in sustainable agriculture while also serving as an advisor to the Pentagon on counterterrorism operations. My phone started ringing before we'd even left Washington. The first call was from my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, who'd always been the family peacekeeper. "Rebecca, honey, I had no idea. Your mother is absolutely beside herself. She had no idea Marcus was... she's been telling everyone for 3 years that you married beneath yourself, and now..." The calls kept coming. High school friends who'd seen the broadcast, college acquaintances reaching out on social media, former colleagues expressing amazement that I'd been married to a war hero this whole time and never mentioned it. But the most satisfying call came 3 days later from Victoria herself. Rebecca, her voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. I saw the ceremony. Did you? I kept my voice carefully neutral. The whole firm saw it. We were all there when they showed it at the foundation dinner. Rebecca, do you have any idea how this looked? Everyone knows we're sisters. Everyone knows Mom and Dad cut you off for marrying him. And now everyone knows exactly who they cut me off for marrying. There was a long pause. Rebecca, we need to talk, all of us, as a family. This whole misunderstanding, it's gone on too long. I almost laughed. Misunderstanding? Victoria, you called my husband a dirt farmer at my wedding. You asked him if he even had health insurance. You posted pictures from grandfather's funeral specifically to make sure I knew I wasn't welcome. We were wrong, she said, and I could hear the words physically hurting her to speak. We were completely wrong about him, about you, about everything. Mom wants to make this right. Does she? I let the silence stretch. Victoria, for 3 years, you've treated Marcus like he was beneath contempt. You've excluded me from every family event, ignored every attempt I made to reconcile, and made it clear that you were ashamed to be related to me. What exactly has changed? Everything! The word exploded out of her. Rebecca, do you understand what this means for my career? I've been trying to get military contracts for months, and now everyone knows I'm estranged from the wife of one of the Army's most decorated generals. The Pentagon liaison who was at the ceremony asked me why I wasn't there supporting my sister. I had to admit that we'd had a falling out. Now I did laugh. So you're worried about your career? It's not just that, but her tone suggested it mostly was. Rebecca, the whole city saw that broadcast. Everyone at the country club, everyone at the foundation dinner, everyone Mom and Dad know socially. They've spent 3 years telling people how disappointed they were in your choices, and now they look like fools. Yes. The admission seemed to surprise her. Mom had to leave the dinner early. She couldn't face the questions. And Dad. Rebecca, you know how important his reputation is to him. He's up for appointment to the state Supreme Court next year. Having it public knowledge that he disowned his daughter for marrying a Medal of Honor recipient, it doesn't look good. I felt a deep satisfaction settling in my chest. So they want to reconcile because it's politically inconvenient to have estranged me. They want to reconcile because they realize they made a terrible mistake. The mistake was judging Marcus by his profession instead of his character. The mistake was cutting me off for choosing love over their approval. Those mistakes had consequences, Victoria. They don't just go away because the truth came out. Over the following weeks, the calls kept coming. My mother crying actual tears as she apologized and begged me to come home for Christmas. My father, stiff and uncomfortable, but clearly panicked about the political implications of the estrangement. Extended family members who'd ignored me for years suddenly wanting to reconnect. The social pressure on them must have been enormous. The local newspaper had followed up with a feature story about military families, focusing on the sacrifices made by soldiers and their spouses. They'd interviewed several of our neighbors, all of whom praised Marcus as a wonderful man and expressed bewilderment that anyone could have looked down on him. The country club set, always eager for gossip, had apparently made the Hartwell family's rejection of Marcus a major topic of conversation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my mother couldn't show her face at the club without someone making pointed comments about supporting our troops and not judging books by their covers. But the final straw came when Marcus received an invitation to speak at the annual Veterans Day ceremony at the state capitol. The governor himself had called to request that our state's newest Medal of Honor recipient participate in the ceremony. As a sitting judge, my father would be required to attend in his official capacity. I could imagine his horror at the thought of sitting on the podium while the man he'd rejected as unworthy gave a speech about service and sacrifice to a crowd of thousands. The optics would be devastating. Judge Hartwell, who'd refused to attend his own daughter's wedding to this war hero. 2 days before the ceremony, my parents showed up at our farm unannounced. I was in the kitchen when I heard the expensive purr of my father's BMW coming up our gravel driveway. Through the window, I watched them climb out of the car, both dressed in their country club finest, looking completely out of place among the chicken coops and vegetable gardens. Marcus was in the barn, but I could see him through the open doors, and I knew he'd heard them arrive. His posture had shifted subtly, not quite military attention, but something close to it. I let them knock for a full minute before answering the door. My mother looked terrible. Her usually perfect composure was cracked, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. My father stood behind her, his jaw set in the stubborn line I remembered from childhood arguments, but his eyes betrayed his desperation. Rebecca! My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. Please, we need to talk. I stood in the doorway, not inviting them in. About what? About the fact that we were wrong, my father said, the words clearly difficult for him. About the fact that we misjudged your husband completely. His name is Marcus. Marcus, my father corrected himself. We misjudged Marcus completely. You didn't misjudge him, I said. You refused to judge him at all. You looked at his profession and decided that was all you needed to know. You never bothered to learn anything about him as a person. My mother stepped forward. Sweetheart, please. We're here to apologize. We're here to make things right. Are you? I crossed my arms. Or are you here because you're embarrassed? Because everyone you know saw that ceremony and now you look like the kind of people who disown war heroes? The direct hit made my father flinch. Rebecca, that's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been giving Marcus a chance 3 years ago. Fair would have been coming to our wedding. Fair would have been including us in family events instead of posting pictures to make sure I knew I wasn't welcome. We know, my mother said, tears starting to flow. We know we hurt you. We know we were wrong about everything, but please, honey, don't let our mistakes destroy our family forever. It was then that Marcus appeared beside me, moving with that silent military precision that had taken me years to notice. He was clean, but still in work clothes, and I saw my parents' eyes involuntarily drop to his dirt-stained hands before catching themselves. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, he said politely. I'm Marcus Chen. My father extended his hand awkwardly. General Chen, we owe you an apology. Actually, Marcus said, his tone pleasant but firm. You owe my wife an apology. I'm used to people making assumptions about me. It comes with the territory. But Rebecca, she's been carrying the weight of your rejection for 3 years. That's the real damage here. The simple dignity of his response seemed to hit my parents like a physical blow. Here was the man they'd dismissed as beneath their daughter, graciously accepting responsibility for their reconciliation while making it clear that the real victim was me. You're right, my mother said, turning back to me. Rebecca, we're so sorry. We're so sorry for everything we put you through. For cutting you off, for treating you like you'd made some terrible mistake, for missing so many important moments in your life. The question is, I said, are you sorry because you realize you were wrong about Marcus specifically? Or are you sorry because you realize your whole approach was wrong? My father looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, if I'd married a farmer who was just a farmer, no military background, no hero story, no secret identity, would you be here apologizing? Or are you only sorry because it turned out Marcus was secretly someone you could respect? The silence that followed was answer enough. Because that's the real issue, I continued. It's not that you misjudged one person. It's that you raised me to believe that a person's worth is determined by their profession, their social status, their ability to impress people at cocktail parties. Marcus would be the same good man whether he'd been a general or a grocery clerk, and if you can't understand that, then you haven't learned anything at all. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. I fell in love with Marcus because he's kind, intelligent, hardworking, and honest. Because he treats me like an equal partner. Because he makes me laugh and supports my dreams and never tries to change me into someone else. His military service is something I'm proud of, but it's not why I married him. I looked at both of them, these people who'd shaped my entire understanding of success and failure. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to understand that we're not going to perform for you. Marcus isn't going to wear his uniform to family dinners to remind you that he's worthy of respect. I'm not going to spend my time proving that our choices are valid. We're happy with the life we've built together, and if you can't accept that life on its own terms, then we don't need your acceptance. My father, who'd spent his career making pronouncements from the bench, seemed at a loss for words. My mother was crying openly now, but she managed to speak through her tears. "We want to try," she said. "Please, Rebecca. Give us a chance to try. We know we can't undo 3 years of hurt, but please don't shut us out forever." I looked at Marcus, who gave me the slightest nod. Not permission. He'd support whatever decision I made, but acknowledgement that the choice was mine to make. "Christmas dinner," I said finally. "Here, at our house. You come as guests, not as hosts trying to control everything. You eat what we serve, you respect our home and our choices, and you treat Marcus like the good man he is, not like some celebrity you're trying to impress." "Yes," my mother said immediately. "Yes, of course, whatever you want." And Victoria comes too, with the same conditions. No snide comments. No passive-aggressive observations about our lifestyle choices. If she can't manage that, she's not welcome. "She'll be there," my father promised. "We'll all be there." After they left, Marcus and I sat on our front porch, watching the sun set over our fields. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of chickens settling in for the night and the distant lowing of our neighbor's cattle. "Think they'll actually change?" Marcus asked. I considered the question. I think they'll try. Whether they succeed, that remains to be seen. "And if they don't?" I reached over and took his hand, feeling the calluses that had once marked him as unsuitable in my family's eyes. "Then we'll have given them a chance, and we can move forward without regrets." Christmas dinner was a revelation. My parents arrived precisely on time. My mother carrying flowers from her own garden, and my father holding a bottle of wine that hadn't been selected to impress anyone. Just a good bottle from a local vineyard he'd heard Marcus might enjoy. Victoria was the last to arrive, and I could see her surprise as she took in our home. Not the hovel she'd imagined, but a warm, beautifully furnished space filled with art and books, and evidence of a life well lived. The meal itself was simple but perfect. Marcus had prepared most of it: roasted chicken from our own flock, vegetables from our garden, bread he'd made that morning. I watched my family's faces as they realized that this man they'd dismissed as beneath contempt was actually an accomplished cook, an engaging conversationalist, and a gracious host. But the real moment came when Victoria, perhaps emboldened by wine, finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering her all evening. "Marcus, why didn't you ever tell anyone about your service? I mean, when we weren't very welcoming. Why didn't you just tell us who you really were?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because that wasn't who I was anymore," he said finally. "When I came here, I was trying to build a new life. I didn't want to be General Chen, the war hero. I wanted to be Marcus, the farmer. Rebecca fell in love with that version of me, and that felt honest, real." He looked around the table at my family. "Besides, if someone can't respect me as a farmer, why should their opinion matter when they find out I used to be a soldier? Rebecca saw something worth loving when I was just a guy growing tomatoes. That's the kind of love you build a life on." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people finally understanding something important. My mother was the first to speak. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time it sounded like she really meant it. "I'm sorry for being the kind of person who couldn't see past appearances. I'm sorry for raising my daughters to think that way too. We all have room to grow," Marcus said simply, and somehow that gentle response was more powerful than any accusation could have been. The evening ended with genuine hugs and tentative plans for future visits. As we cleaned up together, something that never would have happened at my parents' formal dinner parties, I caught Marcus smiling. "What?" I asked. "Just thinking about how much things have changed. A year ago, I was worried about whether the corn would come in on time. Now I'm having dinner with my in-laws who finally approve of me. Do you care that they approve of you now?" He shrugged, stacking plates with the efficiency of someone who'd done his share of kitchen duty. "I care that you're happy. I care that you have your family back if that's what you want. Their approval of me, and that's nice, but it doesn't change who I am." That was my Marcus. The same man, whether he was receiving medals from the president or washing dishes in our kitchen. The same man my family had been too blind to see. 6 months later, Victoria's firm landed their first major Defense Department contract. She made a point of telling everyone it had nothing to do with her connection to Marcus, but I noticed she'd started mentioning her war hero brother-in-law in casual conversation. My parents began visiting regularly, and slowly, carefully, we rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't the same as it had been. Too much damage had been done for that. But it was better. They'd learned to see value in things they'd previously dismissed, and I'd learned that some people need dramatic proof before they can change their minds. Marcus continued farming, though he also began consulting for the Pentagon on agricultural security issues. Apparently, his combination of military expertise and farming knowledge made him uniquely qualified to assess threats to the food supply. The work paid well and let him contribute to national security without returning to active duty. We started hosting an annual Veterans Day barbecue on our farm, bringing together local veterans and their families for a day of good food and shared stories. My parents not only attended but began volunteering to help organize it. Watching my judge father flip burgers while chatting with a Vietnam vet about crop rotation was surreal, but heartwarming. The most satisfying moment came 2 years later when my mother called to tell me she'd been volunteering at the local VA hospital. I met a young man there, she said, recently discharged, having trouble adjusting to civilian life. He reminded me of how Marcus might have felt when he first came home. I wanted to help. That's when I knew they'd really changed. Not because they'd finally recognized Marcus's worth, but because they'd learned to look deeper, to value substance over surface, to understand that heroism comes in many forms. The farm thrived, our marriage grew stronger, and gradually, the wounds left by years of family conflict healed over. Marcus never did wear his uniform to family gatherings, and I never felt the need to remind anyone of his achievements. We'd learned something valuable about the difference between being respected for who you are and being respected for what you've done. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on our porch and watch the sun set over the fields Marcus had planted with his own hands. Sometimes he'd tell me stories from his military days, and sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence. The medals were in a drawer somewhere, but the man I'd fallen in love with was right there beside me, dirt under his fingernails and peace in his eyes. My family had laughed when I married a poor farmer, but I'd gotten the last laugh when I married the richest man I'd ever known. Rich in character, rich in love, rich in all the things that actually matter. The rest was just bonus.